Some encounters may seem fleeting, yet they have the power to change a person's entire life. In this world, sometimes we don't need a miracle, we just need to meet the right person, at the most fateful moment. That person might not bring us wealth, fame, or grand promises, but they give us a reason to live, to love, and to become a better human being. Today's story will take you on an emotional journey between Lucas Evans, a lonely billionaire CEO, and Ethan, a little boy selling candy on the street corner. From what seemed like a simple, ordinary meeting, a deep connection was born, a father-son bond without blood, but full of love, if you love healing, touching, and deeply human stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Heart Glow so you won't miss these heartwarming journeys. One story, one light, every week. And now, let's dive into the story. Lucas Evans, a name that commands the attention of the entire tech world. At 38, he is the founder and CEO of a billion-dollar corporation specializing in artificial intelligence solutions for governments and global conglomerates. But behind the dazzling headlines and the spotlight-filled press conferences lies a man utterly alone in the world he built. Lucas has no close friends, no romantic partner, and his family fell apart long ago. He lives in a luxurious penthouse towering over Manhattan. Everything is modern and sophisticated. Yet chillingly cold, after losing his mother at a young age, Lucas shut his heart off. He believed emotions only made people weak. He buried himself in work, using success to fill the void. Anyone who's worked with Lucas would describe him as a machine, precise, efficient, and never letting emotions interfere with his decisions. To Lucas, the world is run by logic and results, there's no place for softness, and yet. He never imagined that a small, seemingly ordinary event would soon shake everything he believed in. That late afternoon, Lucas had just left a high-level tech conference in Boston. On his way to the airport to return to New York, he sat silently in the back of a luxury car, skimming through emails and financial reports. A light rain began to fall, casting a hazy blur through the car windows. As the vehicle stopped at a red light in a small neighborhood, something on the sidewalk caught Lucas's attention, something that rarely happened. A thin boy, around 9 years old, stood under the worn-out awning of an old building, holding a basket of colorful candies. He wasn't calling out or pushing his products, he just stood there, quietly and politely, with hopeful, sparkling eyes. Lucas saw something strange in him. A feeling difficult to describe, as if a fragment of his own buried memories was reflected in the boy's gaze. The driver turned to ask, "Shall I keep going, Mr. Evans?" Lucas hesitated. "Wait a moment," he replied, then opened the car door and stepped out, leaving the driver and bodyguard stunned. Lucas walked slowly toward the boy. The rain was growing heavier, but the child remained patiently standing, hugging his candy basket like a treasure. When he saw the tall man in a designer suit approaching, the boy showed no fear and didn't step back. Instead, he smiled and bowed politely. "Good evening, sir. Would you like to buy some candy?" It was a simple question, but the way he said it made Lucas pause. The boy's voice was soft, courteous in a way that felt rare. His bright black eyes were steady, unshaken even before a stranger in the rain. Lucas sensed a strength beyond the boy's age. "What's your name?" he asked, surprised that he had spoken first, the man who typically avoided children. "My name is Ethan. I sell candy to help my grandma," the boy replied without hesitation. Lucas glanced down at the basket. The candies were carefully wrapped and arranged by color. Each one even had a label with its name and price, such attention to detail that it caught Lucas off guard. you made all of this yourself?" Lucas asked. "Some I made, some I got the recipe from the internet. I can do mental math really fast too. You can test me if you want." Ethan beamed with pride. Lucas chuckled, something his assistant hadn't seen him do in years. There was something about the voice, the eyes, that stirred something long dormant in his heart. As the rain poured harder, Lucas took off his coat to shield Ethan's basket. And the two of them huddled under the awning. Ethan told Lucas about his daily life, going to school in the morning, caring for his grandma in the afternoon, and selling candy at night. He said it all calmly, without complaint or resentment, as if hardship had simply become a part of life. "Don't you ever feel tired?" Lucas asked, his voice unexpectedly gentler. "Of course I do. But whenever I feel tired, I think of my grandma. She's the only family I have left. I want her to live a long life with me," Ethan said, his eyes still glowing in the rain. Lucas felt a lump rise in his throat. Neither of them said anything for a few seconds, only the sound of rain tapping on the tin roof remained. In that moment, Lucas was no longer a distant CEO, but simply a man brushing against the most human part of his soul, a part he had buried for so long, a small boy. Standing in the rain. Still holding on to a pure and loving heart. Lucas couldn't explain the feeling swelling inside him. He just knew. He didn't want to walk away. Lucas led Ethan into a small cafe nearby to escape the rain. As the boy gently wiped his basket with napkins, Lucas asked, "Where are your parents?" Ethan looked up, eyes calm. "My dad passed away when I was very little. My mom left a long time ago. I don't remember her face. I've lived with my grandma since I could walk." Lucas stayed silent. He looked at the tiny, frail boy in front of him, carrying the weight of an entire household. Ethan shared that his grandma used to be a nurse, but now she's old and suffers from heart disease, barely able to move. Every morning, Ethan prepares her medicine, food, and reminds her to lock the door before he heads to school. After class, he does odd jobs when he can, then sells candy at night. "How do you manage all that alone?" Lucas asked. "I'm used to it. I get tired, but I don't want anyone to pity me. As long as I have grandma, that's enough." Ethan smiled. At that moment, Lucas felt something inside him break. He had once had everything, power, wealth, comfort, and still felt empty. But this child, with nothing but a heart full of strength and love. Lucas had never met a child that made him feel humbled like this. The rain eased, and the wind softened. Lucas checked the time. He would miss his flight if he didn't leave now. But his feet didn't want to walk away from that old awning, from the boy named Ethan, who had unexpectedly touched the deepest corner of his soul. Ethan stood up, bowed, and thanked him for buying some candy. "Thank you, sir. I sold more today than usual." "Thanks to you." His voice still polite and bright, as if unaware of the hardships surrounding him. Lucas stared at the boy for a few more seconds. A sudden thought flashed through his mind, something he had never done for a stranger. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a matte black business card, his name embossed in silver, Lucas Evans, CEO, Evans Tech Corporation. "Take this," he said, his voice calm and clear. "If you ever run into trouble or need help, call me. Just say your name is Ethan, I'll remember." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise as he took the card with both hands. You must be someone really important, right?" he asked softly, as if holding a precious treasure. Lucas chuckled and nodded. "Maybe. But today, I feel like I've learned a lot from someone much younger than me." The boy didn't fully understand, but still bowed deeply. Lucas turned and walked away, still lingering on the image of the boy with eyes like stars in the rain. The sleek black car pulled away from the narrow alley. But Lucas's heart, the heart of a man who once believed he could no longer feel, remained there, in the rainy afternoon, and that fateful encounter, and that business card, would become an unexpected thread, one that would unravel a journey of transformation, for both Lucas and the boy named Ethan. After that fateful encounter, Lucas Evans thought he could forget the candy-selling boy with the clear, innocent eyes. But strangely, Ethan's image lingered in his mind in the days that followed, like a faint beam of light slowly seeping through the cold wall that had long surrounded his heart. Lucas didn't understand where that feeling came from. Perhaps it was Ethan's gentle smile, his respectful demeanor, or maybe it was the determined and spirited look in that frail little body. Something about the boy simply wouldn't let him remain indifferent. The red-eye flight took him back to New York, but he couldn't focus on meetings, numbers, or reports. A side of him, one he had long forgotten, was quietly aching. Stirred by the memory of a boy he had just met, 3 days later, he asked his assistant to book a flight back to that small town, not for business this time, but for something deeper. Something he had yet to name. Lucas retraced the scant details he remembered: a small street, an old grocery store, a canopy where the boy often stood selling candy after school hours. It took nearly an entire afternoon, but at last, he saw that familiar figure again, Ethan, still in the faded blue shirt, carefully arranging candy boxes in a woven basket. The boy froze when he saw Lucas return. "Mr. Evans. You really came back." Ethan's voice was full of surprise and joy. Lucas nodded, answering with a soft smile, something rare on his typically stern face. He didn't ask much. He simply sat on the doorstep, bought a few more boxes of candy, and listened to Ethan talk about his bedridden grandmother, his dream of going back to school, about the cold nights when all he had to eat was thin porridge. Those seemingly simple stories tightened something deep in Lucas's chest. The boy never once complained, never pitted himself. Ethan spoke of hardships with bright eyes and a steady voice, as if those struggles were simply a part of life he had long learned to accept. Lucas began returning more frequently. He quietly had someone investigate Ethan's situation, arranged for his grandmother to be moved to a better hospital, and slowly found ways to help without hurting the boy's pride. But what he didn't expect was that the deeper he stepped into Ethan's world, the closer he came to a truth he never imagined, a truth that would change everything. One late autumn afternoon, Lucas returned to the familiar little street as usual. He brought along a few children's books, some warm food, and a new coat for Ethan. But unlike previous visits, filled with light-hearted talks about school, grandma, or little stories, Lucas felt an unusual urge that day. He wanted to know more about the boy's parents. As they sat on a small bench near the bus stop, Lucas turned and gently asked, "Ethan, what's your dad's name?" Ethan looked up at him, paused for a moment, then answered. "His name was Jonathan Carter. But I've never met him. He died when I was born." Lucas's heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat, and his eyes widened unconsciously. That name, Jonathan Carter, struck his mind like lightning. In a split second, all the memories he had buried for 10 years came rushing back, vivid details, screaming sounds, and the moments of blood and smoke rising from the wreckage of a plane. "Jonathan Carter?" Lucas repeated, voice hoarse. Ethan nodded, not understanding why Mr. Evans's face suddenly turned pale. Lucas turned away, trying to suppress the wave of dizziness rising inside him. His thoughts were in chaos. How could this be a coincidence? How could this boy, Ethan, be the son of the man who gave his life to save him? He remembered it all. The horrific plane crash that happened one stormy night when the aircraft carrying him and hundreds of passengers plummeted into the frozen forests of Montana. In the chaos, an unknown passenger, a stranger, had unbuckled Lucas's seatbelt, shielded him with his body, and pushed him out of the cabin before it exploded. Lucas survived. That man never made it out of the wreckage. They had never known each other. Never spoken a word. It was a selfless sacrifice. Lucas had tried to find out who the man was after the crash, but all he ever found was his name on the list of the deceased, Jonathan Carter. For 10 years, Lucas had lived with gratitude toward a stranger, a debt that could never be repaid. He had buried every memory of the crash, haunted by guilt and trauma, and now, the candy-selling boy, the first person to move his heart in years, was the son of the man who saved his life. Lucas said nothing more that day. He just gently patted Ethan's head, trying to remain calm, though his mind was in a storm. The world around him suddenly felt different. This was no coincidence, this was destiny. That night, Lucas lay in the vast bed of his Manhattan penthouse, unable to sleep. The lights remained soft, and outside the window, the sky was pitch black, so silent that memories rose clearer than ever. He sat up, his hands slightly trembling as he poured a glass of water. But what filled his chest wasn't thirst, it was memory. 10 years had passed since that fateful night. A commercial flight from San Francisco to New York, Lucas, then a rising entrepreneur, sat in business class, fine-tuning the final presentation for a major investor meeting. The flight had been delayed due to storms. Tension filled the cabin as turbulence rocked the plane. Then suddenly, the engine screamed. And the world flipped upside down. A deafening explosion tore through the night. The plane fell. Passengers screamed, luggage flew, the lights went out. No one could tell ceiling from floor. Lucas hit the seat in front of him, dazed, blood pouring from his temple. When he came to in the thick black smoke, he heard groans, metal screeching, and fire spreading fast. He struggled, but his seatbelt was stuck. Panic surged, and then, a strong hand pulled him back. A man, about 30, hair disheveled, face bloodied, said nothing, just cut Lucas's belt with a knife. He signaled, "Run." Before Lucas could react, the man braced himself and shoved Lucas through a narrow opening in the wreckage. Then, boom, the cabin exploded in flames. Lucas hit the freezing ground, numb with pain and terror. He looked back, only to see fire consume everything, no trace of the man remaining. When rescue teams arrived, Lucas was one of the few survivors. He didn't know the man's name, only remembered his face, a determined face, calm in the face of death, with eyes that seemed to say, "You must live." Later, when the victim list was released, he learned the man was Jonathan Carter, a father on his way home from a business trip, returning to meet his newborn son. That son was Ethan. Lucas survived. But from that moment on, he was never the same. A debt, a scar, lived inside him, one that could never be erased. For 10 years, he chose to flee the past, burying himself in work, building his empire to fill the emptiness. But tonight, every emotion returned, crashing down like a storm. Lucas placed a hand on his chest, where that stranger had once shielded him, and now, fate had led him to that man's son. His heart ached, but this time it was a pain full of humanity. The next morning, Lucas didn't go to the office as usual. He cancelled all meetings, turned off his phone, and kept only one thing, a printed list of the plane crash victims from 10 years ago. His finger paused on the familiar name, Jonathan Carter. Lucas remembered the eyes of that man, without fear, without regret, only filled with resolve. And love. From the very next morning, Lucas began carrying out his plan to help Ethan, quietly, discreetly, without the fanfare that usually accompanied his billion-dollar contracts or investments in major corporations. He didn't use his assistant. He didn't delegate the task. For the first time in years, Lucas did everything himself. He contacted a small, high-quality private school in the area, one known for its friendly learning environment and emphasis on character education, something Lucas believed was more important than any academic degree. Using a false name, he sponsored Ethan's full tuition for life, including uniforms, books, and nutritious daily lunches. Next, Lucas went to the hospital where Ethan's grandmother had once received care. He silently paid off all outstanding medical bills and opened a special account that would automatically cover monthly treatment fees. No one knew the name of the person paying. There was only a note, a friend of Ethan. The shabby little house where Ethan lived began to change. New doors replaced the old ones. The leaky roof was fixed. One day, an old but still working refrigerator arrived. Another day, a small table and a softer bed appeared. As if some quiet miracle was unfolding, Lucas watched from a distance. No one recognized the man in simple clothes, wearing a cap, sitting in a black car parked a few houses away, as one of the most powerful CEOs in America. But Lucas no longer cared about appearances. He didn't want Ethan to know. He didn't want to create distance. He didn't want the boy to see him as a savior or a benefactor. He simply wanted to help, but helping in silence wasn't easy. One time, when he saw Ethan carrying a large water container from the alleyway back home, Lucas almost stepped forward. But he held himself back. The boy's eyes burned with determination, and Lucas realized, there are some things one must not take away, like the pride and growth of a strong child. Back home, Lucas opened his laptop but didn't work. He stared at a photo of Jonathan Carter, a friend who had briefly entered his life but remained etched in his heart forever. "You see that, Jonathan?" Lucas whispered. "I'm trying. Not as a CEO. But as a human being." And for the first time, something warm flickered within him, a feeling long buried under the frozen years of solitude and dazzling, yet hollow, success. One early autumn morning, as Ethan woke up early to prepare for his candy-selling routine, he was surprised to see his grandmother smiling with a bowl of hot porridge in hand, something they didn't have every day. "Ethan," she said softly, "someone left a bag of rice at our door. There's also some medicine for me." Ethan frowned. He didn't know anyone rich. The neighbors weren't well off either. But he could only silently thank fate, quickly changed clothes, slung his fabric bag over his shoulder, and headed out to the street like any other day. Life couldn't pause just because of a little luck. The next day, a box of instant noodles and a bottle of cooking oil appeared on their porch. Then, one night, the cracked wall, damaged by storms, was suddenly patched and smooth. Ethan started to wonder. Who had done all this? A fairy? An angel? He asked around the neighborhood, but everyone shook their heads. "You might have a secret friend, Ethan," an old lady said with a mysterious smile. Ethan laughed and shook his head. "My friends are as poor as I am." Then, one day, a school admission letter from a private institution arrived, addressed directly to him, clearly stating, "Fully sponsored by an anonymous charity fund." Ethan stood frozen, unsure if it was a dream or reality. His grandmother hugged him, crying, while Ethan clutched the letter tightly, afraid it might vanish if he blinked, yet in Ethan's mind, the image of that strange man from before resurfaced. Tall, with cold but not unkind eyes. Somehow, though the man had only said a few words, Ethan remembered him vividly. He even kept the business card the man gave him. It had faded because he kept secretly taking it out to look at and then tucking it away again, one afternoon. On his way home, Ethan spotted the same luxury black car parked near his house. But as he ran toward it, the car drove off. All that remained was a strange feeling in his heart, as if someone was watching over him from afar. Not to control, but to protect. "I know someone's helping me," Ethan murmured that night as he sat beside his grandmother. "I don't know who they are. But I'll study hard and live well. So that if I ever meet them again, I can say thank you." Lucas heard those words, from inside the car, through a slightly open window. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. He didn't know when, but his eyes had grown moist. How long had it been since he last cried? In that moment, in the darkness of a poor neighborhood, two souls, one old, one young, were slowly finding each other. Not through blood, not for fame, but through something simple, human kindness. At first, Lucas only sat in his car, quietly observing from afar. He didn't understand why he did it, a man once so busy he barely had time for lunch, now spending hours each week watching a boy sell candy. But one day, he rolled down the window and stepped out. Lucas chose a wooden bench in the park near where Ethan usually stood. He bought a mint candy bar, paid 10 times its price, and sat there in silence. Ethan thanked him profusely, then returned to his work, though his eyes couldn't hide the surprise. The next day, Lucas came again. And the next. Over and over. "You're the man from the other day, aren't you?" Ethan timidly asked the 4th time they met. Lucas gave a small nod. "Are sales going well?" he asked. Ethan nodded, then, somehow, began to talk. About his grandmother. About rainy days with no earnings. About how he wished for an old bicycle so he wouldn't have to walk so far. Lucas just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask too many questions. Sometimes he simply smiled or gave a quiet nod. But that was exactly what made Ethan feel heard, a rare and precious feeling in his loud, cold world. There were some afternoons when Ethan would nibble on a cheap ice cream while excitedly sharing about a test he had aced, or how a girl in his class borrowed his pen. Lucas would sit there, his shirt still neatly buttoned as if he had just walked out of a boardroom, but in his eyes was a tenderness he never knew he possessed. One time, Ethan casually asked, "Don't you have work to do, Uncle?" Lucas chuckled softly, "I took the day off today to hear your stories." Ethan burst out laughing. That bright, carefree laughter made Lucas feel like he had just touched something truly alive and pure, like the first sunlight of spring after a long winter. From then on, Lucas started bringing 2 ice creams. One for himself, and one for Ethan. They would sit and eat together, like 2 old friends. Ethan began to open up about sad things too, how he was teased for not having a dad, or for wearing worn-out clothes to school. Lucas didn't say much, he simply placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, silently, but warmly. Just like that, the image of a cold, distant CEO began to fade. In its place was Uncle Luke, the man who sat under the trees every afternoon, with gentle eyes and a quiet, sincere presence. Ethan didn't need to know who he really was. He only knew one thing: when Uncle Luke was there, the burdens in his heart somehow felt a little lighter. As for Lucas, life no longer revolved solely around contracts and spreadsheets. He realized that sometimes, the most meaningful moment in a day wasn't about profit margins, it was a small story told by a boy whose eyes sparkled with hope, and so, day by day, in a small park that no one in the city paid much attention to, an invisible thread quietly began to form, not one of blood, but of the heart, from those simple afternoon conversations. Lucas started inviting Ethan to take walks with him. At first, it was just a few laps around the park, near their usual wooden bench. But slowly, those steps extended, leading them through small streets, roadside ice cream stands, and even to old movie theaters. Ethan had never been inside a movie theater before. When Lucas first suggested it, the boy hesitated. "I don't have any money. And I've never been to one," he said softly. Lucas just smiled. The first time is always the most memorable. And it truly was. Ethan laughed the whole way through a colorful animated film, his eyes lit up like a child seeing fireworks for the first time. After every meeting, Ethan had a new story to tell. About how Uncle Luke took him to get strawberry ice cream, how he sat and listened for an hour as Ethan talked about school, or about the afternoon they fed pigeons together in the park. These little moments slowly filled the empty spaces in his heart, spaces once filled with only darkness and loneliness. Lucas, in return, felt as though he was reliving the childhood he had lost. He grew used to spending Sunday afternoons in a small bookstore with Ethan, reading comic books together. Once, they even made a paper airplane and launched it from a rooftop balcony, a childlike game that made Lucas laugh out loud like a real kid. Even so, Lucas kept a certain distance. He never asked about Ethan's mother, nor did he pressure the boy to share personal stories. He was simply there, in silence, in warmth, in patience. And it was that very presence that gradually earned Ethan's trust and gently opened his heart. One day, it started to rain unexpectedly, and the two of them took shelter under a small awning. Ethan looked up at Lucas, his eyes glistening. "I wish every day could be like this." Lucas looked at him, his heart tightening. In that moment, he realized this little boy was teaching him how to live, once again, but this time through feelings. Not success. Lucas's world used to be filled with skyscrapers, high-pressure meetings, and lavish but empty parties. But now, that world was being repainted with the colors of sweet candy, innocent laughter, and golden sunlight on quiet afternoons in the park, and Ethan, a boy who once believed he was just an invisible child in a vast city, was slowly entering the life of a man who had forgotten what emotions felt like. Two hearts, each once frozen in their own way, were now starting to find a shared rhythm. This wasn't a replacement. It was a rebirth, a journey that both Lucas and Ethan were taking, one small but meaningful step at a time. At first, Ethan didn't know what to call this man. Uncle felt too distant. Sir sounded too old. And just calling him Lucas didn't seem respectful. Every time they met, Ethan would bow slightly and start chatting about everything like they had known each other forever. But he never once said his name. One afternoon, after they had finished their ice cream, Ethan suddenly shouted, "Uncle Luke, watch me throw the ball." The boy didn't even realize he had just given Lucas a new name, one that felt warmer, closer, but Lucas stood still for a moment. Stunned. A wave of warmth surged from his chest, spreading through his entire being. It had been so long, far too long, since anyone had called him something like that. That night, back in his spacious but cold penthouse apartment, Lucas stood in front of the mirror and softly repeated the words Uncle Luke, a gentle smile on his lips. The feeling was strange, as if that name had reached a part of him he thought had died long ago. From then on, Ethan used that name effortlessly. Uncle Luke, I found the book you told me about. Uncle Luke, I got 10 out of 10 on my math test today. Uncle Luke, can we go to the park again tomorrow? Every time he heard it, Lucas didn't just feel like he was being called, he felt like he belonged. To Ethan, Uncle Luke was a term of endearment from a child too familiar with loss. It was his way of drawing a small circle to keep Lucas inside, not too close to get hurt, but close enough to feel his warmth, and to Lucas, those two words were a daily reminder that he was no longer alone. He wasn't just a man who lived to work or to chase cold ambitions, he was someone who could be cherished, who could be needed, not for power or wealth, but simply for being himself. One evening, Ethan fell asleep on Lucas's sofa after a tutoring session. Lucas sat beside him, gently pulling a blanket over the small boy. He looked at that tiny face, those long eyelashes fluttering with each steady breath, and whispered unconsciously, "You got it right, Ethan. I really am your Uncle Luke." It was just a name. But it was a bridge between two worlds. It made a boy without a father feel a little less alone. And it helped a man who once lost his heart to remember what it meant to love again. Lucas Evans, the name that once commanded the respect of business titans and drew constant attention from the media, used to believe that life was a straight path upward, where emotions could be silenced by contract figures and stock values. He had grown accustomed to the coldness of fancy banquets and the fake laughter of the elite. For years, Lucas thought he had reached the top, but not once did he feel truly happy, until Ethan came into his life. It wasn't the moment he signed a billion-dollar deal, nor when he was honored at some prestigious gala. It was that one simple moment when a small boy with vanilla ice cream smudged on his face looked up and beamed, "Uncle Luke, are you happy?" A question so innocent, yet it shattered Lucas's heart, not in pain, but because, for the first time, he realized he could be happy. Because of something so pure, he began to look forward to Saturday afternoons, where the two of them would sit on a park bench, sharing a bag of cookies and telling silly stories. He felt lighter when Ethan sang nursery songs out of tune, or when the boy gifted him a crayon drawing that read, "Uncle Luke is a superhero." One evening, Lucas came home late after a stressful meeting. Exhausted, he opened the door to find Ethan asleep at the study desk. Beside him was a handwritten note, "I waited for Uncle Luke to eat dinner together." His heart clenched, not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar warmth of being waited for. Something he had never experienced in all those years. Slowly, Lucas realized, happiness didn't come from luxury or success, but from quiet moments with a little boy who cared, who shared, and who loved. Laughing with Ethan, he laughed with all his heart. Listening to Ethan's stories, he felt alive, not just existing. One afternoon, Ethan was riding his bike in circles on the grass and yelled, "Uncle Luke, look at me." Lucas smiled, raised his camera, and captured the moment. That simple photo, a boy under the setting sun, grinning with joy, would later be quietly placed on Lucas's work desk, beside event photos, awards, and medals, and every time he saw it, he remembered the greatest lesson of his life: happiness doesn't come from the top, it comes from eyes that smile and a heart that loves. And he knew Ethan was the most precious gift fate had ever given him. That evening, it was lightly raining. Ethan came to Lucas's house as usual after school, carrying his new drawing and a pair of eager eyes, waiting for Uncle Luke's feedback. While Lucas was on a phone call in his study, Ethan curiously wandered into the room next door, the one that was always closed. It wasn't a large room, but it was tastefully and simply decorated. On the bookshelf were several framed photos, most of them of business partners or major conferences. But one photo made the boy stop in his tracks. It was an old, faded picture of two men laughing. One of them was Lucas, much younger, but unmistakably him. The other made Ethan freeze. The eyes, the nose, that smile, strangely familiar. Below the photo was a small inscription, Jonathan Carter, hero of the 2015 accident. Ethan's heart pounded wildly. Jonathan Carter, his father. And the man in the picture was Lucas. The boy turned his head slowly toward the hallway, where the sound of Lucas's footsteps was approaching. Lucas froze when he saw Ethan standing before the photo, the boy's hands clenched tightly, eyes glistening. There was no room left for avoidance. Lucas let out a soft sigh, stepped forward, pulled over a chair, and sat beside Ethan. Then he began to speak, in a low, steady voice, about the accident years ago. He had been en route to an international conference when the plane malfunctioned. Flames spread quickly, chaos erupted among the passengers. As he lay stunned and disoriented, a stranger, Jonathan Carter, rushed to him, dragging him out of the burning cabin. And then the man never came back. Lucas's voice trembled as he recalled the last moment he saw that man's eyes, an unspoken look, a silent farewell. Lucas survived, but he carried a debt he could never repay. Until he met Ethan. Suddenly, everything made sense. Ethan said nothing. He just looked at him, and silent tears fell down his cheeks. All these years, Ethan had only known that his father died when he was very young, leaving his mother and grandmother to struggle alone. No one ever spoke much about him, as if the pain was too great for anyone to bear. He grew up with only a few faded photos and a name, Jonathan Carter, distant and hollow. But now, sitting in front of the man whom his father had once saved, Ethan felt something he had never known before. His father was a hero in someone's heart. He listened to Lucas, every detail, every emotion, every expression. The boy's thin shoulders trembled, not out of fear, but out of emotion. Ethan looked into Lucas's eyes and softly asked, "Was my dad scared?" Lucas shook his head, his eyes red. "No. Your dad was incredibly brave." His eyes were full of love. Ethan buried his face in his hands and began to cry, the tears of a child discovering, for the first time, who his father truly was. Lucas placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, his eyes filled with a tenderness never before seen in the cold-hearted CEO. "Do you know how much you resemble him?" he said. "Your eyes, the way you purse your lips when you concentrate, and especially your kindness, it's all part of what Jonathan left behind." Ethan looked up, tears still streaming. He smiled faintly, a smile mixed with pain and joy. In that moment, it was as if an invisible mirror shattered, revealing the image of a father who had never been in his memory. He no longer felt alone. No longer unsure of where he came from. Ethan reached out to touch the photo, then looked at Lucas and whispered, "I'm proud to be his son." Lucas nodded, his eyes wet too. A circle once thought broken was now mended by a bond so raw, so strong, it left them both breathless. Lucas opened his arms and gently pulled Ethan into an embrace. The boy didn't hesitate, curling into those arms like he had waited for them his whole childhood. They said nothing more. Just held each other in a sacred, quiet space. The rain outside continued to fall, softly tapping on the glass roof. like the heartbeat of two souls that had just found one another. This was no longer a meeting between a billionaire and a poor boy. It was no longer a relationship defined by gratitude. Lucas felt a calm settle over him, a silent wound within him. The wound of surviving without knowing why, now healed by a child's simple embrace. And for Ethan, it was the first time he ever felt truly safe in the arms of an adult, one he knew would never abandon him. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with the program, we kindly invite you to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and feelings. If you find this program meaningful, don't hesitate to share it to support our channel and help spread its values to those around you. Wishing you all a truly meaningful and heartfelt listening experience. The next morning, Lucas took Ethan to his favorite pancake place for breakfast. Gone was the awkwardness of their early encounters. They spoke like friends, like family. After the meal, Lucas sat beside Ethan, gently held his hand, and spoke in a warm, steady tone. Ethan, I want to take care of you. Not because I owe your father, but because I truly care about you. Ethan's eyes widened. He didn't answer immediately, just squeezed Lucas's hand tightly. Lucas continued, I don't want you to be just the boy I helped. I want you to be family. I want you to be my son. Those words dissolved every remaining barrier. Ethan bowed his head, then looked up, whispering, I want that too. Dad. Luke. For the first time, Lucas heard the word dad spoken by that very boy. And his heart felt reborn all over again. After Ethan agreed to call him dad, Lucas didn't wait another day. He quickly hired a private lawyer to begin the legal adoption process. Every document was handled with care and determination. For Lucas, this wasn't just a responsibility, it was something sacred. He wanted to ensure that Ethan would never again have to live in uncertainty or instability. When the court officially granted him custody, Lucas broke down in tears, not from pain or loss, but for the first time in his life, from happiness. Ethan moved into Lucas's grand mansion, a place that had once echoed only with cold, lonely footsteps. Now, it was filled with laughter, conversations, lively breakfasts, and quiet nights reading under soft lights. But what Lucas admired most was Ethan's simplicity and sincerity. Despite now having his own room with a big bed, a fancy computer, and brand new books, Ethan still kept his old backpack, the handkerchief his grandmother had sewn, and the worn-out shoes he used to wear while selling candy. He never became arrogant or dependent. Instead, he remained grateful for every small thing. And that, more than anything, made Lucas feel that he had found a priceless treasure in his life. Being a father wasn't like leading a company. Lucas realized that from his very first awkward moments. On their first morning together, he burned the pancakes and spilled milk everywhere. Ethan just giggled and gently helped him clean up. Lucas felt embarrassed, but in those clumsy little moments, he discovered a strange kind of joy, the joy of trying your best for someone else. Each morning, he drove Ethan to school himself. No more private driver or showy luxury cars. Along the way, they listened to music, chatted about school, and laughed at the silly things Ethan's friends said. Lucas was no longer glued to his phone or email. He learned to set aside work and simply listen when his son talked about getting an 8 in math or a fun club meeting. He learned to just sit quietly when Ethan was sad, not to rush in with solutions, but to simply be there, present, a steady source of comfort. Day by day, hour by hour, Lucas slowly shed the rigid armor of a CEO to become a father, with clumsy but sincere hands, and a heart learning to love for no reason at all. Some lessons aren't found in books or carefully laid out plans. They arrive in ordinary, everyday moments. Like a bedtime hug, awkward at first, but Lucas soon realized that just by holding Ethan close, the boy would smile peacefully and fall asleep faster. That hug was an invisible blanket, wrapping around the heart of a child who once lacked love. When Ethan had trouble at school, bullied by a classmate jealous of his new life, Lucas didn't get angry or try to fix it with power. He simply sat and listened. Then he was quiet. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he respected his son's feelings. Lucas placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, looked him in the eyes with deep understanding, and Ethan knew he wasn't alone. When Ethan needed encouragement, sometimes words weren't necessary. Just a nod, a warm glance from his father, was enough to make him feel strong again. Lucas came to understand that being a father isn't about perfection, it's about presence, sincerity, and being willing to learn every single day. Before Ethan entered his life, Lucas lived like a machine, always conquering, succeeding, never stopping to feel. He feared emotions, believing they made people weak. But everything changed with Ethan. One day, when Lucas yelled in frustration over a work issue, Ethan didn't cry or blame him. He simply walked over and hugged him. "I know. You're tired today, Dad. I'm still here." That simple sentence was like a hug for Lucas's soul, an unconditional forgiveness he had never received before. Ethan taught him that love doesn't have to be earned. Sometimes, it just needs presence and an open heart. Gradually, Lucas learned to forgive himself, for his past mistakes, for the cold years. He learned how to say sorry, something he once thought was a weakness. And he learned how to truly smile, not the polite grin from magazine covers, but a real smile. When Ethan told a silly story about the neighbor's cat, Ethan wasn't just a son, he was a young teacher, a companion who brought light back to Lucas's once frozen heart. One autumn morning, Lucas and Ethan went to the countryside together, to the old grave of Jonathan Carter. Ethan brought a bouquet of wildflowers he picked himself. "Dad liked simple flowers," he said. When they arrived at the cemetery, Lucas stopped, placed a hand on his son's shoulder, then knelt before the grave of the man from years ago. He set the flowers down at the headstone, his eyes softening in the golden morning light. He spoke, not too loudly, not too softly, but clearly, "Jonathan, I owe you my life. And you left this world with something precious, Ethan." He paused, eyes reddened. "I will raise your son as my own. I won't promise perfection, but I promise to love him with all that I am." Ethan stood beside him, gripping his hand tightly. He knew that though his birth father was gone, he now had another father, one who would carry that promise for the rest of his life. That moment didn't need many words, just one promise. And that promise, Lucas carried like a red thread, tying together the rest of his journey. Once, Lucas appeared on the covers of financial magazines, titled Investment Mastermind and Market Pioneer. But now, when someone asked who he was, he simply smiled and replied, "I'm Ethan's dad." And in that sentence, there was no arrogance of a victor, only the warmth of a man who had finally found himself. He no longer buried himself in work. Now, Lucas made time to take Ethan camping on weekends, attend school performances, or simply bake together on Sundays. His office had a little corner for Ethan's drawings. Sometimes, he let employees bring their kids to work too, because he understood that while work was important, love was even more so. Lucas hadn't lost his power, but he had transformed it into something more meaningful. He became a role model, not just for business people, but for anyone who had ever feared becoming a father. Because he understood that to be a dad doesn't require perfection, just honesty, every day, time passed like a long dream, as old wounds gradually became part of a gentle memory. Ethan was now an 18-year-old young man, tall, steady-eyed, with a soft smile that mirrored his biological father, Jonathan Carter. But he didn't just carry Jonathan's strength, he also inherited the compassion and love of Lucas, the second father who stepped into his life like a miracle. At school, Ethan was loved by friends and highly regarded by teachers, not only for his academic excellence but also for his kindness. He was a good listener, stood up for what was right, and never forgot the hard days he spent with his grandmother. Even though he lived in a mansion, he still kept the habit of tidying his room, tending to the garden, and never demanded luxury. Lucas looked at his son every day with a lump in his throat. He had once believed he was unworthy of being a father, yet now, Ethan had proven otherwise. He was the most beautiful result of a journey that began with gratitude and bloomed into love. Although Lucas still held the position of CEO at a leading tech corporation, he was no longer the man who lived and died by numbers. He had learned to balance work and life. Every weekend, father and son would choose an activity together, camping in the woods, cooking a simple dinner, or just sitting side by side reading under the afternoon sun. Lucas discovered that Ethan loved classical literature, especially stories about sacrifice and compassion. Meanwhile, Ethan loved hearing his father talk about the early days of building his business, the failures and hard-earned lessons. Two generations, seemingly worlds apart, found common ground in understanding and sincerity. One time, they baked together, flour flying everywhere, and Lucas burst into laughter when Ethan smeared frosting on his face like a child. They were simple moments, yet they contained an entire universe of love. One day, Lucas was invited for a national television interview on sustainable leadership. When the host asked, "You own billions of dollars and countless subsidiaries, what is the most valuable asset you have?" Lucas didn't hesitate. He simply smiled and replied, "My son." The room fell silent for a few seconds. No one expected the once cold CEO to answer with such heart. Lucas spoke about Ethan, hiding nothing, not his origin, not even the moment he realized that money could never warm a lonely soul. He said it was Ethan who taught him what it meant to truly live, not just exist. When the interview aired, millions of viewers were moved to tears. Ethan sat at home, watching his father on screen, his eyes shimmering with tears, his lips curled in a happy smile. "That's my dad," he thought, "not the richest man in the world, but the one with the most beautiful heart." When applying to a prestigious university, Ethan was asked to write an essay about someone who inspired him. It didn't take long for him to choose, Lucas Evans. In the essay, he wrote, "I don't share his blood, but he taught me how to love, how to stand back up after falling, and that a home doesn't need shared DNA, just shared hearts." He told of the nights Lucas quietly sat beside him when he was sick, of the worried eyes every time he was sad, and of the countless silent moments when words were unnecessary, because they understood each other more deeply than 1,000 conversations. The essay was later hailed by the admissions board as one of the most moving and authentic submissions of the year. But for Ethan, it wasn't just an essay, it was a heartfelt thank you to the man who had changed his life. On the day Ethan officially became a college student, Lucas stood silently watching him walk out the gate with a backpack, sunlight casting a golden glow on his radiant 18-year-old face. Pride swelled in Lucas's heart, not because the boy had earned a scholarship, but because Ethan had grown into a kind and decent human being. Lucas once thought he saved Ethan, but in truth, it was the boy who saved him, from loneliness, from the frozen world he used to live in. Through Ethan, he learned that love needed no conditions, and happiness didn't come from success but from the simplest things. Lucas felt young again, his heart no longer a cold stone, but a warm spring flowing endlessly. He had not only fulfilled a promise to Jonathan Carter, but had also written a new chapter with Ethan, a chapter of fatherhood, of love not bound by blood but deep as kinship. At sunset, Lucas and Ethan walked side by side on the beach, the same one they visited on their first trip years ago. Waves gently kissed the shore, sea breeze tousled Ethan's hair, while Lucas stood calm and grounded. Ethan instinctively reached for his father's hand, the same hand that was once cold, now warm like a fireplace in winter. Lucas gently squeezed his son's hand, eyes gazing at the setting sun. In that moment, without a word, they understood, no matter what life brought, no matter the future. They were forever a family. No bloodlines, no paperwork, just real, eternal love. The story ended not in tears, but with a smile, a hand held tight, and footsteps walking side by side in the sand, traces of a journey of love through each other's lives. There are meetings in life that seem like coincidences, but turn out to be fate. There are hands that once had no connection, but end up holding each other through an entire journey. The Second Father is not just a story about rescue or gratitude, it is proof of a simple truth: love needs no shared blood, only shared heartbeats. And now, as this chapter closes, what remains is not tears, but light, the light that shines from a home. A heart and a fatherly love that, though not of blood, will never fade. On that twilight beach, two silhouettes, one tall, one grown, walked side by side under a radiant sunset. Ethan smiled softly, turned to say, "I used to think my life was nothing but cracks, but now I know, it's through those cracks that the light came in." Lucas nodded, eyes misty, "And you are that light, Ethan. The most precious gift life has ever given me." There was no more debt between them. No more divide between past and present. Just two hearts, one once lost, one once unloved, now finding each other in the sea of life. The Second Father closes, but the love remains, spreading like the last rays of the setting sun, gentle, enduring, and warm. If you believe that love can heal all wounds, if you've ever been touched by imperfect but honest stories, and if you want to spread light from your heart to the world, hit follow on Heartglow, where healing stories are told with real emotion, where every tear has a reason, and every hug is worth more than 1,000 words. Heartglow, the channel of love, where kindred hearts find one another.